Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Joining us today on Writers at Work is the novelist and songwriter Willy Vlautin. He's the author of 7 novels, including The Motel Life and Lean on Pete, both adapted for feature films, and 2008's Northline, which George Pelecanos called his favorite book of the decade. Willy wrote and sang songs for the band Richmond Fontaine, that recorded 11 studio albums, and for the DeLines, whose 5th album, released in 2023, is the soundtrack to his novel The Night Always Comes. A PEN Faulkner Award finalist, Willy's new novel is The Horse, which, like his other books, is set in a dusty and forlorn American West, where even a band playing in a crowded casino can't drown out the echoes of regret. Willy Vlautin, welcome to Writers at Work.
Thanks for having me.
Willy, your novels are populated with characters who are so vivid and fully drawn that I have a sense that you have them fixed in your mind even before you have a story for them. Is that so, or do they develop as you're writing your drafts?
I mean, I think I'll have a general idea when I first start thinking about it. What I tend to do, almost with every novel, is they start as songs, and once I finish the song, the idea doesn't stop; it kind of starts, and so I will think about a book maybe a year before I start tinkering on it, and then I have this old drinking buddy. I've known him for, I guess, 37 years.
Wow.
And he and I always go camping together. We go on these road trips together, and I'll tell him my idea for novel, and he just argues with me the whole time. And he has a horrible memory too. So we'll wake up the next day and he'll go, what were we talking about yesterday about the novel? And then over the night, I'll think about some of the stuff he said, and then I kind of recalibrate it and edit it in my mind, and then I hit him with the same story again. And he'll interrupt you a half dozen times, going like, "That had never happened like that. You're an idiot. Oh, I like that part. I like her. She's cool." And so that's kind of how I started. And then I'd write a list of, like 10-page list of just like of things that I'm going to put in it, and then I slowly start writing a draft, really, just off those couple things.
Yeah. Those characters that you write, Willy, they seem inexorably drawn to bad choices, though, their options are limited by circumstances beyond their control that they're unable to shake. Is that a good assessment?
I mean, I think some characters of mine are dealt a bad hand, and then they play it badly. I've always been interested in people that are trying to stand up for themselves but can't quite do it. It's really hard to make good decisions when you don't believe in yourself, or you've had a rough go, and then somebody says, "Okay, make a good decision." It's scary to make a good decision, because often those mean you have to stand up and take a chance. So it's both. It's both self-defeat and circumstance kind of are kind of married together. I've always been interested in that idea of, if your self-worth is so low, you don't believe you deserve to have something good happen to you, and you sometimes self-sabotage, or you can't take that door. You can't open the door that's like for an easier time, because you're scared of what's on the other side and what will be expected of you. I mean, that's the thing of trying to do something good or standing up, is then there's expectations on you, and that's hard if you've been beaten down for most of your life.
Yeah, your characters they're very sympathetic. And I find myself urging them to do something different. And of course that's unrealistic, because they don't have access to options, or maybe they wouldn't recognize a third, fourth, or fifth option. But they're constrained by lots of things. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, they are. I mean, a lot of it is that idea that I said earlier, like self-defeat. if you've been beaten down, it feels more comfortable to go sideways or even a step lower than it does to take a good option. Or like you said, you might not see it. I think I've always written um, with the idea of like holding somebody's hand going through some hard thing. So many of my characters are going through difficult things, but I always feel like I'm holding their hand. They're not alone while they're going through it. And for me, writing about that sort of stuff takes the anxiety away. It depends which story, of course, but it takes the anxiety away because you're living inside the thing you're so scared of. And so for while I'm working on the stories, I have no darkness or anxiety because I'm trying to help somebody navigate theirs.
Right, right. You
That
know, I
makes
love that. I love that quote by Richard Russo. Let me put it in front of me. He said, "I can't remember the last time I worried myself sick about a fictional character the way I did about Lynette in The Night Always Comes." You know, I feel that way about Al Ward in The Horse. You know, I finished that novel a few days ago, Willie, and I can't shake this guy.
Oh,
Could you?
no, thank you for reading it.
Yeah. Oh, and I love. Thank you for writing it. Could you tell us about Al, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, I always feel like Al's a lifelong musician, but I think he was a guy that always was kind of on his heels. His mom was really cold and pretty rough on him. He didn't have a dad. His He had an uncle, alcoholic uncle, so he didn't have a lot of people around him giving him any kind of stability. So when you meet him, I think he's by nature just kind of like he just gotten hit, and he how he gets by is he realizes that when a song's playing that he can disappear into it and not be himself. It's that idea of the power of music, of just a song playing. You can be 1,000 miles from your house or your life, and he becomes a musician. And although he's not mentally the soundest guy, he has a pretty long career as kind of a journeyman musician. And so the book kind of follows him through his whole life is like a working musician in the casino circuit of from the 60s through say the 80s, and then later on he plays in pickup bands and country cover bands and one time a real band that did all his songs.
Yeah, he seems to be on the verge of achieving something uh, beyond what he would be willing to settle for.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I think it's like so many guys you meet. They're kind of damaged, but they're pretty talented. I don't think he says in the book he never had the guts to leave Reno to try to make it somewhere else because his ex-wife lived in Reno and he was scared to leave. I don't think he was ever stable enough mentally to ever really take a lot of chances. And so, yeah, I think that in every town you go to, there's a handful of probably extremely talented musicians and writers that just, for whatever reasons, get lost along the way.
Yeah, I think people would say self-sabotage, but I don't think that that's it, really. I mean, they don't set out to do damage to themselves. It just happens.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around a lot of guys that self sabotage, like playing in low level bands all my life. I've seen the guys that self sabotage, and I wouldn't put Al that way. I just think Al is
No.
just a little. He's on thin ice. He's been walking on fairly thin ice most of his life, and he knows it. And so he's scared to rock that boat. He's scared to change the way he's doing things because he's scared he'll just disappear and fall through. But I don't see him as a self-sabotage guy. You do meet a few of those kind of people in the book, and Jesus, I've met a lot of those playing music, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. And Al commits the cardinal sin, right? He gives away his songs.
Yeah, I mean that was an interesting thing, just because you hear about that, especially like in the '60s and '70s and '80s, and even now, like I was watching a guy play in a bar in Austin, Texas. And, there's maybe 10 people there, and he was playing. this kind of famous song, and I go, I wonder why he's playing that song. It doesn't seem like a song that he would play. And then it turns out he wrote it
Wow.
and gave the rights away. He made some money on it and got some publishing on it, but a lot of songs, the somebody will say they wrote it and or co-wrote it with somebody, and really they just took it and put their name on it, which is it really interesting. And so, yeah, I think with Al, I mean, I think he writes songs throughout his life, and I think I throughout the book I give you, I think, 230 song titles that he wrote, just to give you a kind of an idea of what kind of songs he wrote, where he was at mentally when he was writing them, what was going on in his life. Um, but I don't think he ever really cared about any of that. I think he just liked the idea disappearing in the craft of it. I don't think the money made any difference to him. Even when he inherits money towards the end of his run, he forces himself into exile, even though he's got $500,000 in the bank that he inherited from his uncle. He doesn't spend any of it. He just can't. So I don't think it was ever money or ambition that drove him. I think it was his way of getting by.
Yeah, he's so vivid, Willie. I think any of us who've traveled and sat in little bars and watched somebody get up to play have seen Al Ward. And yeah, he's just very vivid to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, just, I've been playing in bars since I was 14, 15, and I mean, and I'm just thinking right now, just in Portland alone, there was at least two or three guys that I came across that were just brilliant, and for various reasons couldn't. One, maybe self-sabotage, drugs and alcohol. Another guy just didn't have any ambition, didn't care. But these brilliant guys that wrote songs their whole lives that no one outside, couple hundred people here and there know who they are.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand that you were prompted to write The Horse when you saw a blind and abandoned horse on a dirt road in Nevada. Is that so? Is that what happened?
Yeah, that same guy I mentioned earlier, my first editor, I guess you'd call him. He and I were 30 miles from paved road outside of near Tonopah, Nevada, kind of central Nevada, and we came to this huge desert playa that went on for 30, 40 miles. And we saw what looked like the statue of a black horse. And so we pulled over, got out of the truck and walked over to it. And, you see this old wild Mustang that had, 20, 30 scars on it, meaning like it was an old horse. And so you could see like the map of its life, all the hard times it's gone through. And then we realized it was completely blind. Both eyes were completely swollen shut. There wasn't a tree around for 10 miles, no water for, same 15 miles maybe. And you start realizing that it's the saddest and scariest thing for a horse. Two things. One is they're flight animals, so the horse can't see. So it can't see what's scaring it. And number two, horses, hate being alone. And it was completely alone. And it just, I'd been touring too much and boozing too much myself, and it hit me in a way that I couldn't really fathom. I mean, that was like in 2012 or 13, and I wrote a bunch of songs about it, and I ended up writing this novel about it. It just kind of stopped me in my tracks. That you live your whole life just to end up blind and alone in a desert, and so we camped near it that night, and then the next morning we drove back into town, and they have the Bureau of Land Management that handles wild horses, and they had a guy come out for it. And me and my buddy went farther out to a like an assayer's office, a big old mining claim that in the 1920s had maybe 300 guys working on it. But we're talking like 30, 40 miles from anything. There's just this huge old abandoned mine, and there was a old like wooden assayer's office. And I told my buddy, I go, I'm not going back. I'm going to live out here. And
Wow.
And I was half serious and being dramatic, and a little rattled. And my buddy, known me for so many years, and of course, I gave a little speech about like I can't handle the world anymore. I'm not tough enough for it anymore. And he just laughed and he said, "Well, like, where are you going to plug in your record player? And then you'll miss your wife. Your wife will like be moving on, and you'll start calling her and begging for her to come down there." And
That's
he
funny.
just made me laugh. He made me laugh, and it was really funny. He goes, "Look, you'll get down there and you'll start it all over again, and you'll just be the same guy." So he slapped me around and to my senses, but that's kind of the root of where the horse was, is those two things. And I didn't think I would publish it. But I thought it was just one of those I wrote for myself, because it was me trying to figure out alcoholism, and why I write songs.
Yeah. Willie, when we met back in 2011, you told me you always thought you wouldn't amount to much and that you sought out the dark side arena where you grew up. Is that hovering over you still? That kind of thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about it because it's always been kind of an anchor around me. Yeah, obviously Al Ward lives in that world. And so much of it is, yeah, by the time I was 16, I thought I would be a bum. And so just started hanging out in the old man bars of Reno just to see what it was like. Because back then, Reno had all these, literally like over 120 motels in a mile radius of downtown. That held, majority of were just kind of drifters, like guys that were one step away from being homeless. And it was back then majority, like 75% men. And so you walk around downtown Reno and you just see all these, like, anywhere from say 35 to 70-year-old men just kind of aimlessly walking around. And so at a young age, I started hanging out with those kind of guys, just wondering how bad it was going to be. Now, why that got into me so young, that kind of feeling has been tattooed into me, and I've been trying to chase that sucker, figure that out my whole life. But I'm also the kind of guy that I'm a workhorse too. So my mom was my mom was really scared of being homeless, so it was probably part of that. And she was really scared of ending up living in her car. And so I grew up with that kind of idea that her philosophy was you're 3 steps away from living in your car if you don't have a big family, and we didn't. And so she said you better be careful. So I lived hard like that, but I always got up and went to work, in the morning, because I'm pragmatic too, and I like having my own place too. So
Yeah.
I've been riding that fine line most of my life.
Did you somehow manage that fear or that dread by realizing that you had raw material for storytelling?
No, I never thought about it that way. I joined the band because I loved music so much, like Tom Waits and Springsteen and the Pogues. Like when I'm 13, 14, they were these magical records that you would disappear from yourself. You could feel the pain that these guys were in, but they took you to foreign lands,
Yeah.
and you were suddenly free of yourself. So I joined a band because I loved those records so much, and I didn't know how to get closer to them. You can't eat them, you can't sleep with them,
Right.
so you join up. And with writing, it was a response to being such a bad musician and upsetting people for so long. You upset your mom by playing in the basement all the time. When you have roommates, you upset them because you play the same songs over. I played a lot of bars where no one liked what I was doing. And so one day I just started writing a story, and I realized I was in a library, and you realize, man, I'm not hurting anybody, and no one's mad at me. And I don't have to like stand up in front of anybody because I was extremely shy. So I got addicted to writing, and disappearing into stories. So I never thought about any of it, of publishing or any of it. I really liked it, and then I got addicted to writing about people in hard times, because I was always going in through some hard times, and it just took the edge away. And the only thing I really had going for me is I really did love Reno. I loved that broken side of it. I was in love with it, and I was in love with like Eastern Oregon and Northern Nevada. My mom had a boyfriend that was uh, madly in love with the rural high desert of Nevada, and we just drive around, and all he would talk about is that how lucky I was just to be born in Nevada. That it was so beautiful. So I drank that Kool-Aid too. So I guess I just like disappearing into things. It was only later on that you worry about selling it and all that stuff, but that wasn't for maybe 15 years or so.
Right. So your prose and your songwriting has long bled into each other. I assume by this point you don't see them as separate things.
I always think they live in the same apartment complex and they run into each other. Um, but yeah, they're the one thing is I can write a quick first draft. I can write like a draft. My novels are usually pretty short, but I can write a draft in a year ish, and then I spend maybe 2 to 3 years editing it. So editing's like my main. If I have any gift at all, it'd be the perseverance of editing. And while you're editing, I always have a guitar near me, and I end up writing a lot of songs kind of soaked in the world that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So they are married that way. So that's like if I have a really melancholy book, like Don't Skip Out on Me, which about killed me to write, because I love that guy so much. I wrote an album of instrumental music for him, and same with earlier with a novel of mine called Northline. I wrote a novel. I mean, I wrote a soundtrack to it because the gal was so beat up and so sad all the time, and I just felt horrible for her, and so the songs just kind of came.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by these spoken word albums that you've done, Willie. I found them all on Bandcamp, which our listeners can do the same. Um, and you have your the musicians from the D Lines or some of your colleagues from Oregon, and some of them are inspired by your novels or short stories, and some of them are original works. And so that's how they come to be. Your editing and your guitar is right there, and this is a new expression using the same sort of milieu and characters.
Well, I've always loved audiobooks. I've always been a fan, and maybe some of that's just from driving around so much, like being in a band or road tripping, but mostly being in a band. I got obsessed with them. So for me, it's just fun. Like A Jockey's Christmas was
Right.
just me having fun. Which is really funny because when I wrote the novel Lean on Pete, which is about horse racing, no one at the track, they knew I'd written a book, but none of them read it, but they'd all listened to Jockey's Christmas, and so like all the track guys would just talk about, oh, you're the guy that wrote about the jockey at
Oh
Christmas.
man.
I'd be like, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I just do it for fun. And the kill switch um, with the lines, I was just trying to, we were off the road for a few years because our singer Amy Boone got hit by a car, and was struggled for a couple of years to get back on her feet, and so I just started coming up with ideas for us to work, but fun, but for fun, and so I did the kill switch for that.
Yeah, I get the sense that it's not very casual in the sense that the characters I get I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, Willie. The characters won't let you go. They still have something that they want to say.
I think it's a little bit like Al Ward, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I've leaned on writing songs and stories to just get by, and I don't know if it's just me using that as a crutch, um, or if I just can't shake thinking. I think too much maybe, and writing helps take the edge off, but also I think I grew up at a time when John Steinbeck was, I was taught all his major works in high school, and I really bought into that, and living with a single mother that was really struggling, and who was, sexually harassed by men, and paid less than men. I think I'd always wanted to write more working class stories, or people that have walked with a limp their whole life, and still got by. I think I've never outgrown writing those kind of stories, so I think about them all the time. And so, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess they won't let me go.
And Willie, when we write something, we have something that's ours. When it's completed, we did it. That it's an achievement, it's an accomplishment. And no matter how we feel about ourselves, there's that thing, right?
Well, yeah, and it depends on which day of the week. If you're, I would never read any of my old novels, but I know the heart. I believe in the soul of it, and I believe in the blood of it. Whether I'm a good craftsman, or it's a successful novel, or the sentences hold up, I know it's got good soul. And so, yeah, as long as you don't dive looking back at him, and it is amazing to know that your books are like in a Goodwill next to the other books, or in a bookstore next to other books, or in a library next to other books. I mean, I saw one of my books in a Goodwill the other day, and it was just tattered. It had coffee stains on it, and was all like somebody'd read it quite a bit. And I mean, nothing makes you feel better
No,
than
that's
that.
great.
Yeah.
I've been speaking with novelist and songwriter Willy Vlautin, and I must say I agree with Joe Hill, who said of Willy's bodies of work, no one anywhere writes with such power and stark beauty about American desperation and want, American loneliness and heartache. Willy, thanks so much for joining us on Writers at Work.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim. I really appreciate it. And man, I hope we get to hang out soon.
That'd be great, Willy. You take care. Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.